I hadn't expected to fall in love with a furniture piece, much less an antique couch with worn wooden legs and faded floral upholstery. But a month after I moved into Maplewood Towers, a mid-rise condominium complex in the heart of a bustling American suburb, I spotted this charming vintage sofa in a local thrift store. Its curved arms, ornate carvings, and slightly tattered fabric hinted at a long history. I instantly pictured it as the centerpiece of my living room, a cozy place to read or host guests. Little did I know that an innocent love of vintage decor would soon spark an all-out drama with our dreaded HOA enforcer. Her official name was Bernadette Farnett, though everyone secretly called her Karen. She was in her early 50s, slender, always impeccably dressed in pastel suits, with short, styled hair that never seemed out of place. Officially, she served as the Maplewood Towers Homeowners Association Vice Chair for Aesthetics and Standards. Unofficially, she acted as the self-appointed gatekeeper of every design choice in our building, from hallway paint colors to potted plants on balconies. Her position gave her the power to interpret the HOA bylaws with alarming fervor. If Karen believed something clashed with her personal sense of style, she claimed it violated official guidelines. I first encountered her about 2 weeks after I'd brought my antique sofa home. I was still in the process of moving boxes, and I foolishly left my door propped open while I ran down the hall to grab something from the storage closet. Returning, I found Karen standing in my living room doorway, staring at the sofa with a look of horror. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest. "Is that second-hand furniture?" I blinked, taken aback by her blunt intrusion. Yes, it's a lovely antique couch," I replied, letting the faint annoyance show in my voice. "Can I help you with something?" Karen sniffed, stepping closer as though she had every right to inspect my possessions. "Actually, you can. Our building has a certain image to maintain. We prefer a clean, modern style. And I'm afraid that thing looks like it came from a musty, old attic." I bristled. "It's from a thrift store?" "Yes, but it's in good condition. I think it adds character." She gave a brittle smile. "Character is all well and good, but Maplewood Towers prides itself on contemporary elegance. I'm concerned your piece might bring down the property's aesthetic. Besides," she added with a condescending tilt of her head, "I'd worry about bedbugs or pests." My mouth fell open, a wave of indignation rising in my chest. "I had it inspected," I said curtly. "It's perfectly safe, and I don't see anything in the HOA rules about forbidding antiques." Karen cast a smug look. "We have a clause about maintaining consistent decor that aligns with the building's modern design. I'll have to double-check, but I'm quite sure older furniture can be considered a violation if it disrupts the uniform appearance of Maplewood Towers." Anger churned inside me. This was my personal living space, not a shared hallway. But I recognized the futility of arguing with her directly. She'd weasel her way into citing some ambiguous guideline, threaten fines, and cause endless headaches. For the moment, I swallowed my frustration and thanked her for her concern, closing my door firmly. I had no intention of bowing to her demands. This sofa was mine to keep. That very evening, I pored over the Maplewood Towers HOA handbook. It outlined everything from parking rules to acceptable window coverings. While there were sections about upholding a cohesive architectural look in shared spaces, I found nothing specifically forbidding residents from owning vintage or antique pieces within their private units. The only possibly relevant section warned against storing unsightly or dangerous items in public view, but clearly referred to balconies, patios, or visible window displays that clashed with the building's exterior uniformity. Nonetheless, the next week, a sealed envelope appeared in my mailbox. It bore the Maplewood Towers HOA letterhead and read, "Notice of Design Non-Compliance. Resident of Unit 5B. Our records indicate that you have introduced furnishings inconsistent with the modern aesthetic standard of Maplewood Towers. This constitutes a potential violation of Section 9.2.3, maintaining cohesive design schemes, of our bylaws. While you may keep personal furniture, We strongly discourage items that might negatively impact property values or create an eyesore if visible from common areas. Please arrange to have any such furnishings removed or replaced promptly. Failure to comply within 14 days may result in a formal review and possible fines. Sincerely, Bernadette Karen Farnett, Vice Chair, Aesthetics and Standards. I read it twice, rage bubbling within me. The note was ridiculous. My vintage couch couldn't possibly harm property values, nor was it visible to the general public. Sure, if I left it in the hallway or on my balcony, that might be a different matter. But it sat in my own living room behind closed doors. The only way it'd be visible to others was if I left my door wide open, a rare scenario indeed. I decided to vent to a friend, Alyssa, who lived a few floors below me. She was an avid thrifter, too, with a flair for mid-century modern design and a laid-back sense of style. If anyone would understand my frustration, it was Alyssa. We grabbed coffee in the building's small cafe lounge, and I showed her the letter. "This is crazy," Alyssa said, shaking her head. "Does she think she can ban every older piece of furniture in the building just because it doesn't fit her personal taste? She once made me remove a doormat because it wasn't the approved color scheme." I sighed. "I love that couch. It's not harming anyone. She can't just force me to throw it out." Alyssa leaned forward. "You're right, and you're not alone. I know at least a dozen residents here who cherish vintage furniture or decor, myself included. She can't single you out and get away with it." An idea flickered in my mind. The condo had a population with diverse tastes. Some liked the sleek, modern vibe. Others, like me, appreciated quirky, older pieces. We rarely displayed them publicly, though, because Karen made such a fuss. What if we joined forces somehow? We might prove that vintage items were not eyesores, but beloved pieces of history. Treasures, even. If we collectively pushed back, Karen's demands would appear narrow-minded. But how to do so in a meaningful, visible way? The day after receiving the official notice, I attended the monthly HOA meeting. Usually, only a handful of board residents showed up, plus the 5-person board. Karen, the HOA president Linda Morales, the treasurer Kyle Chun, and 2 other members. The meeting convened in a small, beige-walled conference room near the lobby. I slid into a seat at the back, scanning the short agenda. Parking updates, budget approvals, and a line item reading discussion. Furniture and decor standards. Karen presided over that portion of the meeting with a self-satisfied air. "Recently," she began, "we've become aware of certain residents introducing outdated or worn furnishings into their units. While I respect personal taste, we must remember that Maplewood Towers brand is modern, sleek, and upscale. Old furniture, especially if it's secondhand, can pose risks like pests or mold and generally degrades our cohesive style. I propose we clarify the bylaws to prohibit any decor older than 15 years or of questionable condition from being placed in units where it might be seen by others." I nearly choked on my bottled water. Seen by others could be interpreted any number of ways. Karen continued. "Additionally, we might consider requiring photographs of new furniture purchases to ensure compliance with our aesthetic guidelines. It would be a proactive measure to maintain our standards." A few gasps erupted. Even some of Karen's usual supporters looked stunned. Linda Morales, the president, hesitated. "That seems rather invasive, Karen. People have a right to furnish their private homes as they wish, as long as it doesn't violate safety rules or genuinely degrade the property." Karen gave a tight smile. "Of course, but we have to be vigilant. One rotten apple can spoil the barrel, you know." At that, I stood and raised my hand, heart pounding. Linda nodded for me to speak. I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I recently got a letter calling my antique couch an eyesore. It's not in a public hallway. It's in my living room. I'm concerned this rule you're proposing crosses the line into personal freedom." Karen's eyes narrowed. "The board has the right to ensure compliance with our building's aesthetic. We don't want an environment that looks piecemeal or cheap. And old furniture can be, well, cheap." A wave of murmurs crossed the room. Others were clearly uneasy with her approach. Sensing that she might have overstepped, Karen backpedaled slightly. "Of course, we'll continue to discuss. This is merely a suggestion, not a mandate. But I do believe it's in our best interest to keep Maplewood Towers aligned with modern design. The meeting ended with no formal vote on Karen's proposal, but the issue hovered in the air. A few neighbors approached me afterward, whispering their support for my stance. A middle-aged man named Carlos said, "I've been collecting antiques for years, mostly stored them in my basement storage unit because I feared Karen's reaction. Keep fighting, and I'll back you up." Another resident, an elderly woman named Marjorie, confided that her grandmother's heirloom rocking chair had drawn Karen's disapproval last year, though she'd never received a formal notice. "It's time someone stood up to that woman," she said firmly. Back in my condo that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind whirled with indignation. Telling people they must have modern furniture only? That was so shallow and, quite frankly, authoritarian. The building was composed of individuals with different backgrounds, incomes, and tastes. Some cherished antiques for sentimental reasons. Others admired them for style or for sustainability. Better to reuse older items than buy new ones. Now, Karen wanted to ban them altogether? Over my dead body. I thought about other ways to highlight the value of older furniture. Then it struck me, host a vintage furniture swap meet. If enough residents who owned or appreciated antiques gathered in a visible, communal area, we could celebrate the charm of older pieces. Perhaps a handful of us could bring items we no longer needed or wanted to trade or sell. Others might come to browse, chat, or show off a beloved piece. Such an event could make a statement. We wouldn't be hiding our old items behind closed doors. Instead, we'd proudly display them in the building's main lobby, typically used for holiday decorations or welcome receptions. The idea was bold. Karen would despise it. But if we followed the proper channels, submitting an event request to the HOA board, reserving the lobby, etc., she couldn't easily shut it down. This wasn't about defacing common spaces. It was about a neighborly exchange of goods, well within the building's guidelines for community events. Excited, I messaged Alyssa, "Hey, what if we organized a vintage swap meet in the building's lobby? Everyone can bring or admire older furniture pieces, decor, or knickknacks. Show Karen that these are treasured, not trash. Think folks would join?" She replied within minutes. "Love this idea. Count me in. I can bring my mid-century coffee table that's too big for my new layout. My neighbor also has old chairs she wants to swap. Let's do it." So the seed was planted. I would gather like-minded residents, formally apply for the lobby space, and orchestrate the largest show of vintage furniture Maplewood Towers had ever seen. Let Karen call them eyesores if she dared. If enough people enjoyed the event, the HOA might see the popularity of vintage style and override her biases. In the week that followed, Alyssa and I formed a small planning committee of 5 neighbors who shared our passion. Each of us had at least one older item we could display: chairs, tables, lamps, you name it. Our building had a bulletin board by the elevator where we posted events and announcements. With the board's permission, we hung a brightly colored flyer: "Vintage and Antique Swap Meet, where Maplewood Towers Lobby. When? Saturday, 10 a.m., 4 p.m., 2 weeks from now. Bring any gently used or antique furniture/decor you'd like to sell, trade, or showcase. Celebrate the style and history of classic pieces. Explore sustainable, budget-friendly options. Everyone welcome." Hosted by residents for vintage appreciation. To ensure we followed HOA protocol, I emailed the event request form to Linda Morales, explaining we'd do everything by the book. We protect the lobby floors with mats where needed, keep walkways clear for safety, ensure people took their items back if they didn't sell. Linda seemed intrigued and placed our request on the board's agenda for final approval. Given that Karen was only vice chair, she couldn't unilaterally veto events if the rest of the board supported them. In the meantime, word spread quickly. Enthusiastic neighbors told me how they'd yearned to find new homes for old furniture or pick up interesting pieces on a budget. Even some folks who preferred modern decor confessed curiosity about older styles. A few said they'd come purely for the social aspect, excited to meet neighbors and sip coffee amidst a pop-up vintage showcase. Still, a dark cloud loomed. Karen. As soon as she noticed the flyer, I braced myself for backlash. Sure enough, a few days later, I received an email from her. Subject: concern regarding vintage swap meet. Hello. I see you're spearheading this swap meet. Please remember to adhere strictly to building regulations. We must ensure no damage or unsightly clutter occurs in our lobby, which is designed for modern, sophisticated gatherings. I hope you'll discourage participants from bringing items that are torn, outdated, or otherwise offensive to Maplewood Tower's upscale image. Thank you. Bernadette Karen Farnett, HOA Vice Chair, Aesthetics and Standards. I roll my eyes reading offensive. Antique furniture could be many things: whimsical, classic, or even nostalgic, but offensive was a stretch. Nonetheless, I responded politely, reaffirming we'd handle logistics responsibly. Meanwhile, Linda Morales emailed me, letting me know the board had approved our request, albeit with standard guidelines for traffic flow and safety. Victory! Karen couldn't block us. The swap meet was on. The next 2 weeks flew by in a flurry of planning. We reserved a few rolling carts for transporting bulky items. Alyssa and I compiled a digital sign-up sheet for neighbors to list what they were bringing, so we know roughly how many tables or display racks we needed. We set up a small corner for free items that folks might simply want to give away, and an area for sale items with suggested prices. A separate zone was designated for a swap corner, where residents could trade pieces of similar value. The response was overwhelming. By the final count, we had over 30 participants intending to bring items, from small accent chairs to lamps, side tables, paintings, and even a vintage record player. Word spread beyond the building. Some residents invited friends from other complexes, but we decided to limit official participation to Maplewood Towers folks only. After all, it was meant to be an in-house community event, though we didn't mind outside visitors dropping by to browse. Karen, for her part, grew increasingly vocal in the building's online forum, cautioning about fire hazards or blocked exits. I calmly reassured everyone that we'd keep pathways open, limit each participant's display space, and supervise the day. Linda Morales posted a supportive message praising our efforts to encourage sustainability and community spirit. That made Karen's rants look even more shrill in comparison. The night before the swap meet, I could hardly sleep. My own living room was cluttered with items I planned to set up or trade. An ornate brass lamp, a pair of intricately carved wooden side tables, and a small collection of vintage glassware. Perhaps I'd find a new coffee table that better fit my space. Or maybe I'd simply help connect other neighbors with pieces they loved. One thing was certain. This event was shaping up to be bigger than I'd ever imagined. Saturday dawned bright and crisp. By 9 a.m., our little committee was bustling about the Maplewood Towers lobby. The space was large, featuring polished marble floors, a vaulted ceiling, and sleek modern light fixtures. For big gatherings, there were fold-out tables stored in a nearby utility room, so we set them up along the perimeter. We carefully laid down mats where heavier furniture would rest, ensuring we wouldn't scratch the floor. In the center, we arranged a few conversation areas using residents' own vintage seating, a set of mismatched chairs, an antique couch even older than mine, and a whimsical retro bench from the 1960s. As neighbors trickled in with their pieces, the lobby gradually took on the appearance of a curated vintage market. Someone brought a tall Art Deco lamp that cast a warm glow. Another showcased a mid-century sofa in teal tweed. The old record player found a spot in the corner, softly spinning a jazz tune that lent a nostalgic ambience. People beamed with excitement, chatting about each item's history or quirks. Around 10 a.m., a flood of residents arrived, wide-eyed and eager. Some carried boxes of smaller trinkets, vintage clocks, decorative plates, old cameras, even typewriters. Others simply strolled around, sipping coffee from the stand we'd set up near the front desk, marveling at the variety on display. Laughter filled the air as people bargained or swapped. It felt like a lively festival, a million miles from Karen's sterile vision of modern uniformity. Of course, I half expected her to appear, brandishing a tape measure or a rulebook. But for the first hour, she was nowhere in sight. I exchanged a grateful look with Alyssa. Maybe Karen had chosen to ignore the event rather than create a scene she couldn't win. But the peace didn't last. Near 11 a.m., the building's front doors whooshed open, and in marched Karen, flanked by one of her few loyal supporters, a gentleman named Philip who often seconded her motions in HOA meetings. She was dressed in a crisp white blazer, her expression as chilly as an Arctic wind. Halting by a table displaying old postcards and figurines, she scanned the room with disapproval. I walked over, determined to remain polite. "Good morning, Karen," I greeted. "Welcome to our vintage and antique swap meet. Care to look around?" She pursed her lips. "I see an awful lot of worn-out pieces in here. Are you sure they're not damaging the lobby floors?" She glanced pointedly at a small dent near the wall, as though it were proof of our wrongdoing. I gestured to the thick mats we'd carefully placed. "We've taken precautions." The building manager gave us the green light. "No damage so far. Everyone's being cautious." Karen made a show of inspecting a mid-century end table. "This is exactly the kind of outdated furniture that drags down property values. We're supposed to project a sleek, modern vibe. Instead, we have a rummage sale in the lobby." A few nearby neighbors overheard her sneer. One older man, who'd brought a beautiful mahogany writing desk from the 1930s, frowned. "This piece is in fantastic condition. Hardly worn out. It has far more character than half the bland modern stuff you see in stores." Karen stiffened. "This is not about personal taste, sir. It's about consistent building standards. I'm well within my rights, as vice chair, to shut this down if it violates safety or design rules." She turned to me. "I see items stacked near that exit. That's a fire hazard. We have to maintain a certain clearance." I bit back a retort. The exit was clear, with at least 4 feet of space. She was just nitpicking. Calmly, I said, "We followed all guidelines, Karen. Linda Morales approved this event. There's no hazard here, I promise." Karen huffed, scanning the crowd for Linda. Spotting her near the main entrance, she marched over. I followed discreetly, as did a few other participants. Linda, seeing Karen approach, offered a pleasant smile. "Great turnout, isn't it?" Linda said cheerfully. "Folks seem to love exploring these older pieces." Karen forced a thin-lipped grin. "Linda, I'm concerned about the official stance of the board here. We have so many questionable items out. Are we sure this is beneficial to Maplewood Tower's image?" Linda sighed gently. "Yes, Karen, we've discussed this. The board voted to allow the swap meet as a community-building activity. The only condition was ensuring safety, and I see no violations. Everyone's abiding by the rules. As president, I see no reason to intervene." Karen's nostrils flared. "Fine. Then I expect the organizers to be responsible for any damage or issues." She cast me a withering glare. "I'll be watching." With that, she stalked off, Philip trailing behind like a faithful puppy. Ignoring Karen's simmering presence, we continued the swap meet. The atmosphere was vibrant. Neighbors who'd never spoken before bonded over shared love of vintage design. People swapped stories about how they acquired certain pieces: a lamp from a grandparent, a decorative mirror found at a flea market in Paris, a tapestry crocheted by a great-aunt. Some discovered unexpected treasures for their own condos. Others were happy just to chat and admire. We'd also arranged a small repair station, where a crafty resident named Maurice gave demonstrations on refinishing wood surfaces or sewing minor tiers in upholstery. It became a mini workshop, drawing curious observers. The environmental message was clear. Reusing and reviving older furniture was more sustainable than tossing it in landfills. Around noon, I spotted Karen near the far corner, arms folded tight. A group of residents was admiring a gorgeously carved sideboard from the 1940s. Karen hovered close, probably hoping to pounce on any sign of damage. But the owner, a woman named Daniela, calmly showed how she'd laid felt pads under the sideboard's legs. Karen had no cause for complaint, so she slunk away, frowning. Meanwhile, Linda Morales and Kyle Chun strolled around, smiling. Kyle, the treasurer, even purchased a small vintage clock for his office. "This is wonderful," he told me. "People are so engaged. This is exactly the kind of communal spirit we need." Buoyed by this success, I made sure to greet newcomers and guide them through the system of swap, sell, or free. A woman who'd planned to just browse ended up swapping her mass-produced shelf for a unique antique side table. Another traded a modern lamp for a retro 70s floor lamp she'd admired. Even a pair of teenage siblings, normally glued to their phones, found themselves fascinated by a rotary telephone on display. Around 1 p.m., we took a short break to recognize our building's maintenance staff. They were on hand to help if anything got too heavy, and we thanked them for their time. The camaraderie in the lobby was palpable. The only sour note was Karen's looming figure, occasionally snapping photos on her phone, presumably collecting evidence of wrongdoing. Yet everything we did was by the book, leaving her no real ammunition. As the afternoon wore on, we welcomed a steady stream of residents. Even some who initially scoffed at old furniture admitted they enjoyed seeing the variety. We gathered around the center conversation area, relaxing on the vintage seating. That's when Karen made her final attempt to sabotage the event. She approached the group of us, myself, Alyssa, Linda, and a half-dozen others, with a crisp envelope in hand. "I have an official notice," she announced. "We have an urgent complaint that this event is causing noise disturbance and potential safety infractions. Effective immediately, I'm issuing a cease and desist for the swap meet." Everyone stared in disbelief. Linda frowned. "Karen, you don't have unilateral authority to shut down a board-approved function. What safety infractions are you referring to?" Karen plucked a piece of paper from the envelope, reading in a clipped voice. "Excessive traffic in the lobby, furniture blocking egress points, possible presence of pests and secondhand items. I have reason to believe multiple code violations are at play. We must end this gathering for the welfare of the building." I held back a laugh. Her claims were so transparently false. But it wasn't funny. She might cause a scene. Alyssa, eyes flashing, calmly said, "Show me where the egress is blocked. Every walkway is open. We've checked multiple times. And pests? That's pure speculation. Each item is inspected for any sign of damage or infestation. We have zero evidence of any problem." Karen lifted her chin. "We can't risk it. If we discover an infestation later, we'll know who to blame. I'm acting in the building's best interest." She turned to Linda. "As vice chair, I demand you support me." Linda let out a measured breath. "Karen, your allegations have no proof. I will not arbitrarily shut down a successful, well-managed event. The entire board stands by it. And if you truly suspect code violations, call the city inspectors. Otherwise, you're interfering with a sanctioned activity." For a moment, Karen's face twisted in frustration. She was used to people cowering before her. But Linda's firm stance, coupled with the crowd's visible support for the event, rendered her powerless. Anger flickered in her eyes. Then she whirled around and stomped out of the lobby, leaving her empty envelope behind. A wave of relief spread through us. Once Karen stormed off, the atmosphere grew even lighter. Residents laughed, resumed chatting, and carried on with trades and purchases. Some joked that we should rename the event Karen's Eyesore Emporium, which got plenty of chuckles. But mostly, people just relished the sense of community pride. This swap meet felt like more than just a market. It was a statement of unity against overbearing rules. By 3 p.m., the crowd had thinned slightly, but a steady trickle of visitors remained. I walked around, checking on each station. The free corner was nearly cleared out. Neighbors had happily taken home donated lamps, side tables, or picture frames. The swap section bustled with bartering, while the for-sale tables had rung up a modest but satisfying number of transactions. Any large furniture that didn't sell was either rolling back to the owner's condos or being arranged for future pickup by interested buyers. We had sign-up sheets to keep track of addresses and phone numbers, ensuring no item was left abandoned. Linda made a short speech around 3:30 p.m., thanking everyone for respecting the building's guidelines and proving that vintage and antique pieces could coexist with Maplewood Tower's environment. She praised the spirit of sustainability and neighborly engagement. Her remarks drew applause, and a small cheer rose at the mention of Karen's protest overshadowed by community success. though Linda politely refrained from naming Karen directly. In the final half hour, I found myself chatting with a neighbor who'd purchased my brass lamp. She was thrilled, saying it would be perfect in her reading nook. "All I had to do," she said, "was give you that small coffee table in exchange, which suits your living room better." A total win-win. Indeed, I was delighted with the coffee table's simpler lines, which paired well with my beloved antique couch. A synergy of old and older, ironically, but it looked great. By 4 p.m., as we began the official wrap-up, it was clear the event had been a triumph. So many residents had participated that we barely recognized the once empty lobby. Piles of bubble wrap and leftover mats were quickly tidied up, and the building's maintenance staff gave us a thumbs up, remarking how organized we'd kept everything. In the days following the swap meet, Maplewood Towers buzzed with the aftermath of our victory. Many folks posted photos on the building's forum showcasing their new, old acquisitions. A few wrote heartfelt notes praising the event's eco-friendly and community-building aspects. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Karen was furious, ranting about eyesores and chaos, but with no real basis for complaint. Even the official feedback was glowing. Linda Morales sent out an email to all residents. "Thank you to all who participated in the vintage and antique swap meet. We are pleased to report 0 safety incidents, 0 damage to common areas, and an overwhelmingly positive response. This is a fine example of neighbors uniting to share resources and interests. We look forward to more creative events in the future." Linda Morales, HOA President. With Linda's backing, the event's success became an implicit rebuke of Karen's rigid aesthetic crusade. In the following HOA meeting, she tried once again to push for modern-only design guidelines, but the rest of the board shot her down. Kyle Chin even cited the swap meet as proof that older items don't necessarily degrade property values. Some pieces were quite valuable and well-kept, showing quality can come from any era. Frustrated, Karen resorted to pettier tactics, like leaving typed notes on specific neighbors' doors, warning them about faded curtains or retro door knockers. But these attempts mostly backfired. Residents, newly emboldened, complained to Linda, who politely reminded Karen that cosmetic preferences did not equate to bylaw violations. If the item was safe and not in disrepair, it was allowed. Karen's sphere of influence shrank, and people felt freer to display or own what they loved. Even so, she remained a sour presence in the building, a cautionary figure who'd lost her ability to intimidate. Amid these changes, I reveled in my new living room setup, pairing my antique sofa with a swap coffee table. The synergy gave the space a cozy, nostalgic charm. Every time I sank into that sofa with a book, I remembered how close I'd come to discarding it under Karen's pressure. Instead, I'd stood my ground and found an entire community willing to join me. One evening, while walking to my unit, I encountered Karen in the hallway. She slowed, giving me an imperious once-over. "You must be very proud of yourself," she said icily, turning the lobby into a flea market. I met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, actually, I am proud. People found pieces they love, they bonded with neighbors, and the lobby emerged unscathed. Seems like a success to me." She pressed her lips together, as if searching for a scathing retort. Finally, she just sniffed. "Don't think you can keep flaunting old junk. The building's standards haven't changed." I offer a mild smile. "But they have, Karen, just a little. People realize now they can love older designs and that it's perfectly fine. You can keep your modern aesthetic in your condo, and I'll keep my vintage pieces in mine. We can coexist." Without waiting for her response, I walked on. Her glare followed me, but she said nothing more. Deep down, I felt a spark of triumph. Karen might never admit defeat out loud, but the momentum had shifted. She could no longer wield the bylaws to impose her personal taste. The building recognized that modern design was only one option among many. Maplewood Towers had discovered that variety, vintage, antique, or contemporary, gave the place real character, not the bland uniformity Karen peddled. Over the following months, Maplewood Towers embraced a more inclusive attitude toward design choices. Residents who'd once hidden older items behind doors or in storage felt free to bring them out. The building's official decor in the hallways remained sleek and modern, of course, but if someone hung a small antique mirror inside their door or displayed a piece of vintage art on their balcony wall, facing inward, no one batted an eye. Linda periodically reminded the community of the basic guidelines for safety and maintenance, but that was it. Encouraged by the success of our event, the HOA even introduced a new initiative, a quarterly community reuse day, encouraging neighbors to exchange or donate items to reduce waste. People found fresh ways to connect, forging bonds over shared tastes or complementary needs. The building's collective spirit deepened, less about strict uniformity and more about the rich tapestry of individuals living within its walls. As for Karen, she remained in her position but found her influence waning. She still patrolled the building, occasionally scolding someone for scuffed paint or mismatched balcony furniture, but her threats carried little weight. The president and the board had seen how a grassroots movement could unite neighbors, overshadowing Karen's narrow viewpoint. Our new normal was a fragile piece, but one resting on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than fear of her condescending mandates. One day, I bumped into Linda in the elevator. She smiled warmly. "I'm so glad you organized that swap meet," she said. "It opened all our eyes to the possibilities. Karen won't admit it, but the board's behind you fully. Don't be afraid to plan more events." I thanked her, remembering how intimidated I'd felt after Karen's first letter. Now, I realized the power of a supportive community. Sometimes, you just have to stand up for what you believe in and invite everyone else to celebrate with you. And that, in the end, was our happy resolution. Maplewood Towers thrived, blending the old with the new, forming a mosaic of styles that suited the diverse people who called it home. Karen could no longer bully residents into conforming to her shallow aesthetic. She might forever brand my antique couch an eyesore, but my neighbors and I saw it for what it truly was, a charming piece of history, like so many hidden treasures we'd brought into the light. Thus, the next time I curled up on my beloved vintage sofa, a steaming mug of tea in hand, I smiled at how the story had turned out. A single piece of old junk, as Karen called it, had sparked a full-blown rally of residents determined to showcase and preserve the beauty of the past. We'd proven that by banding together, we could transform our building's lobby into a vibrant swap meet, overshadow the negativity, and defend our right to personal expression. In the process, Maplewood Towers grew into a warmer, more colorful community for everyone. And that was the best possible ending to our vintage revolution.